In our notes, the first thing that stood out wasn't shouting. It was how quiet the house sounded while someone made a choice that couldn't be undone. Noelle Hart was the kind of person who tried to earn peace by being prepared. That's why what happened to her mattered. She didn't lose an opportunity because she was careless. She lost it because the people closest to her decided she didn't deserve to keep it. Here's how she remembers it. I had my blazer on before the coffee finished dripping. Not because I was late. I wasn't. My interview was at 10 in the morning at the Denver Tech Center, and I'd mapped the drive from Littleton a dozen times. I planned to pull out at 8:55, beat the traffic, sit in the parking lot, and breathe. My phone was fully charged, portfolio in my tote, backup copies of my resume. The whole thing felt almost calm. Almost. Downstairs. The TV was on low. Brandon was on the couch like it was any other Tuesday, scrolling, one ankle on his knee. Dad stood at the counter, wiping the same clean spot with the same paper towel. Brandon looked up first. "You're really doing the whole suit thing. It's an interview." Dad didn't turn around. "Try not to work yourself into a state." "I'm not." I told him. "I'm ready." Brandon's mouth twitched. "That's what you always say." I kept my voice even. "I don't always say it. I say it when I'm prepared." Dad finally faced me, eyes flat. Prepared people don't need to announce it. I nodded like that didn't land in my ribs. Brandon stood and wandered into the hallway, blocking my path like it was accidental. "Hey, grab the backup folder from the safe room before you go." Dad said redundancy matters. The safe room. Dad lifted his chin. The old storage room. The one with the reinforced door. "It's where I keep important things." I hesitated for half a second. Brandon opened the door for me like he was doing me a favor. "See? Teamwork." I stepped inside and reached for the light. Behind me, the door shut. Then metal slid into place. In the dark, Brandon's voice came through. Calm and close. "Relax. You're spiraling again. If you want more stories like this, subscribe to Revenge Pulse and stay close." I wrapped my hand around the knob and turned hard. Nothing moved. The light didn't come on. I tugged the chain again, slower this time, like maybe I'd missed it. Still nothing. The air smelled faintly like dust and metal, the way garages do when they haven't been opened in a while. "Brandon." I called, not loud yet, controlled. "Very funny. Let me out." His breath came through the door before his voice did, like he was standing close on purpose. "You're already wound up. That's the problem." I twisted the knob harder. It turned a fraction and stopped. Solid. Not stuck. Locked. Open it. Silence. Then a soft click on the other side, like someone leaning back against the wall. Dad's voice joined in, steady and almost bored. "Lower your voice." My chest tightened. "I need to leave in 15 minutes. "You don't need to do anything," he said. "You need to calm down." I am calm. The lie came out thin. "This is important." Brandon laughed once. Short. "Everything's important to you." I stepped back and hit the door with my palm. Not hard. A warning knock. "This isn't helping." "That's because you think help is comfort," Dad replied. "It isn't." I looked around, letting my eyes adjust. Shelves bolted into the walls, a metal cabinet. No window. The door was thicker than I remembered, the frame reinforced. This wasn't a closet. It was built to hold. "I can't be late," I said. "They start at 10. Dad didn't raise his voice. He never did. "If you can't regulate yourself here, you won't manage in a boardroom." Brandon cut in. Closer now. "You're lucky. Honestly." "For what?" "They didn't even pick me when I applied. That stopped me." "What, 2 years ago?" "Same program." A pause. "Didn't make it past final round," Dad added, like it was a footnote. It wasn't the right time. My hand slid down the door. That explained too much all at once. The way Brandon watched me pack my portfolio, the tightness in his smile. I'm not you, I said quietly. That's the point, Brandon shot back. If you get this, I disappear. I tried the hinges next, fingers scraping metal. Bolted. Of course they were. I pushed my shoulder into the door, once, twice. It didn't give. The sound came back at me dull and flat. Dad spoke again, closer now. I'm doing this for you. For me. My voice cracked, then steadied. You locked me in a room. I told him to, he said, like he was admitting to moving a chair. You need consequences before someone else teaches them harder. I leaned my forehead against the door and breathed until the shaking slowed. My phone buzzed in my hand, the screen bright in the dark. 8:48. I opened the recorder. The red dot blinked on. The recorder stayed on while nothing happened. That was the strange part. Not the shouting. The waiting. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, knees pulled in, phone resting against my thigh. The red dot blinked steadily. Patient. Outside the door. Footsteps moved away and then back again, like pacing was allowed for them, but not for me. I pressed my palm flat against the wood. It was colder than I expected. Brandon's voice came through again, farther this time. You always do this thing where you turn everything into a crisis. I'm locked in a room. I said, that's not a thing I'm turning into anything. Dad cut in before Brandon could answer. You're reacting instead of thinking. I am thinking. I said, I'm thinking that I'm missing my interview. A pause. Not the kind where someone feels bad. The kind where they decide what to say next. You're missing a test, Dad said. That's all. I closed my eyes. The word test sat there, heavy. You didn't tell me there would be a test. That's because real ones aren't announced. I stood up again, tried the door once more, slower. Same result. I moved to the shelves, checked behind the cabinet. Even though I already knew there wouldn't be a release latch hidden back there, he wasn't careless like that. If he built something, he built it all the way. My shoulder went into the door harder this time. The impact rattled my teeth, but the door barely answered. Don't hurt yourself, Brandon said. Not concerned, almost annoyed. You're proving the point. What point? I snapped. That you can't handle pressure. I laughed then. I couldn't help it. It came out sharp and wrong. I've been handling pressure my whole life. Not like this, Dad replied. You spiral when something matters too much. It matters because I worked for it. Brandon stepped closer again. I could hear his breathing now. You don't get it. You walk in there and win. And then what am I? The question hung there, unanswered by anyone but him. Dad cleared his throat. This isn't about you two competing. It is, Brandon said. You know it is. Silence followed, long enough that my chest started to ache from holding air. I leaned my forehead against the door again. The wood didn't feel like an obstacle anymore. It felt like a decision someone had made a long time ago. This room, I said, quieter now. You built it so it couldn't be opened from the inside. Dad didn't deny it. It's a safe room. For who? For protection. I checked the time on my phone. 8:56. My planned departure time had already passed. You're not teaching me anything, I said. You're just stopping me. Dad's voice softened, which somehow made it worse. Sometimes stopping is the lesson, Brandon added, almost under his breath. You'll thank us later. I didn't answer. There wasn't anything left to argue that would change the math of it. The hinges were bolted. The lock was external. The room wasn't meant for conversation. It was meant for containment. I shifted my phone in my hand and angled it closer to the door. The red dot kept blinking. And for the first time since the lock turned, I stopped trying to get out and started paying attention to what they were willing to say while they thought I couldn't go anywhere. I didn't sit back down. Standing felt better, like it kept something in me from folding. I rolled my shoulders once, slow, then pressed both hands against the door and leaned in, not slamming, testing. The door didn't move. Not even a shudder. I stepped back and checked the hinges again. Thick screws. Deep set. Whoever installed them had done it to last. My phone buzzed in my palm. A calendar alert. Leave house. I swiped it away without thinking and shoved the phone back into my pocket. The recorder was still running. I could feel it like weight. "Stop pacing," Dad said through the door. "You're making yourself worse. I'm trying to get out. You're wasting energy." Brandon sighed. Exaggerated. "This is exactly what I mean. You push when you should pause." I turned toward the wall instead of the door and scanned the room again. The shelves were empty except for a couple of plastic bins and a folded tarp. I dragged one of the bins over and stepped on it, reaching toward the ceiling. No vent, just drywall and a seam where the ceiling met the wall. My fingers brushed along it anyway, like maybe something would give out of pity. Nothing did. My shoulder hit the door again, harder this time. The impact rang up my arm and into my neck. I hissed through my teeth and rolled my shoulder, blinking until the sting dulled. "That's enough," Dad said, closer now. "You're going to hurt yourself." "I already am," I said. "That's the point." Brandon laughed softly. Not amused, nervous. "You're being dramatic." I slid down the wall and sat on the floor again. Legs stretched out this time. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs until they stopped. "Look at the time," Brandon added. "You weren't going to make it anyway." I pulled my phone back out. 8 minutes past 9. "I would have made it," I said. "I planned for traffic." "You plan for everything," Dad replied. "That's why this is good for you." The word "good" landed wrong, like it didn't belong anywhere near this room. I leaned my head back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. There was a faint crack running along the corner. I'd never noticed it before. Probably had been there for years. "This room," I said, slow. "You built it to hold?" "Yes, not to let someone out." Silence. Then, "Correct." My breathing evened out, not because I was calm, because there was nothing left to push against. I reached into my pocket, checked the screen again. The red dot blinked back at me when I unlocked it. I didn't adjust the phone this time. I didn't need to. They were already saying enough. I stopped checking the door. That was the shift. Not calm. Not acceptance. Just a clean stop, like a muscle giving up after it understands the limit. I leaned back against the wall and pulled my knees in, phone resting in my hand. The screen had dimmed, but the recorder was still running. The red dot blinked, steady and quiet. Brandon's voice floated back. "Lower now. You're really just going to sit there. I'm listening," I said. Dad let out a slow breath. "This isn't something you need to document. Then don't say anything you wouldn't want remembered." A pause. The kind that tells you someone noticed a line had been crossed, even if they don't know how yet. Brandon spoke first. "You always twist things." "I don't have to twist anything," I said. "You're doing it out loud." Dad cleared his throat. "Turn that off. No. You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I smiled once, sharp and brief. "You already made it big when you locked the door." Silence followed. Not empty. Heavy. I could picture them in the hallway, standing the way they always did when they didn't want to look at each other. Brandon broke it. "You know I didn't mean for it to go this far?" I lifted my phone a little higher. "You closed the door," Dad added, firm again. I told him to. Let's be clear about that. The words landed clean. No anger, no regret, just ownership. "Why?" I said, keeping my voice level. "Because you don't learn from reassurance," he replied. "You learn from impact." I nodded to myself, even though he couldn't see it. "Then say it again." "What?" "Say you told him to lock me in." Another pause. Longer this time. "I told Brandon to lock the door." Dad said, "I believed it was necessary." The red dot blinked. Brandon muttered something under his breath. Dad didn't correct him. I checked the time. 9:46. My planned departure felt like it belonged to another person now, someone who still thought preparation could protect them. I rested my head against the wall and closed my eyes. The recorder kept running, and for the first time that morning, I felt like I wasn't trapped with them. They were trapped with their own words. The lock turned at 9:50, not rushed, not apologetic. Just the clean sound of metal sliding back where it came from. Light spilled in and I squinted, blinking fast. Brandon stood there first, hands in his pockets. Weight tipped onto one hip like this was inconvenient but over. Dad was a step behind him, already wearing that look he used when he decided something was finished. "There," Brandon said. "You're out." I stood up slowly. My legs felt thick, like they belonged to someone else. I brushed my palms down my pants. Once, twice, more for grounding than cleanliness, and stepped past them without a word. "You didn't need to make such a scene," Dad said as I walked down the hall. "You could have just sat and breathed." I didn't answer. I grabbed my tote from the chair, my keys from the hook, phone already in my hand. The screen lit up with the time. 9:54. Brandon followed me into my room. "You still have time. Just call them." "I am," I said, already dialing. The line rang twice before someone picked up. A woman's voice came through, calm and practiced. I gave my name, kept it brief, explained there'd been an emergency and I was delayed. She paused. Papers shuffled. The panel waited until 10:15. She said gently, "If you'd called before we released the room, we might have held—" I pressed my lips together. "I called as soon as I could. I understand," she said. And she did. That was the hardest part. This program requires reliability under pressure. We have to move forward. Thank you for your time. I managed. The call ended. The house felt louder without it. Dad stood in the doorway now. "See," he said. "Better this way. You failed in private." I slid my phone into my pocket and picked up my keys again. My hand was steady. "I didn't fail," I said. I was stopped. No one replied. I walked out the front door and let it close behind me. The sound softer than the lock had been. The house didn't change after that day. I did. Mornings kept happening. Coffee, the low hum of the refrigerator, Dad reading the news like nothing had bent, Brandon sleeping late, then leaving in a rush, phone pressed to his ear. No one brought up the interview again. That was fine. I didn't either. I started picking up freelance work online. Small contracts at first. Short deadlines. Long nights. I took certification courses after dinner. Headphones in. Volume low enough that I could still hear footsteps in the hall. I learned to pause videos when someone walked past my door. One night, Brandon leaned against my doorframe, arms crossed. "You're still mad. I'm busy." He scoffed. Dad made a call for me, just to get my foot back in somewhere. "Good," I said, eyes on my screen. "You don't want to know where no." That seemed to bother him more than an argument would have. Dad tried once, over dinner. "You don't have to prove anything. You know that." I nodded. "I know." He watched me like he was waiting for something else. An apology. Gratitude. A crack. None came. The recording stayed on my phone. I didn't listen to it. I didn't need to. Knowing it was there was enough. A reminder that I hadn't imagined the door, or the lock, or the way my name sounded when they said it without me in the room. Weeks passed, then months. One afternoon, an email came through while I was folding laundry. Subject line simple. Interview scheduled. I read it twice, then once more, slower, downstairs. Brandon laughed at something on his phone. Dad asked him about a meeting. I closed my laptop and went back to folding shirts, careful with the edges, like I was packing without anyone noticing yet. The work stayed quiet. So did I. The lobby smelled like coffee and something citrusy, pumped in on purpose. I checked in, clipped the visitor badge to my blazer, and took a seat along the wall. My hands rested in my lap. Still, Brandon came in 10 minutes later. He spotted me mid-step and slowed, smile tightening like it had been set wrong. He straightened his jacket, glanced around, then walked over. "You're here," he said, flat, like I'd taken something from him just by standing up. "So are you." He lowered his voice. "Dad said this place values referrals. I heard." A coordinator called names. Not ours yet. Brandon paced a little, stopped, paced again. He kept smoothing his hair like it might rearrange the room. When they split us into groups, we went different directions. The conference room they sent me to had a long table, water glasses already set. I took a seat, lined my pen with the edge of my notebook, and waited. Questions came, straight ones, work stories, missed deadlines, pressure. I answered without reaching for anything dramatic. I talked about rebuilding after a loss, about staying steady when the timeline breaks. Heads nodded. Someone wrote something down. In the hallway afterward, Brandon brushed past me. They asked about stress. He muttered. I told them the truth. What truth that people get in their own way? They called us back to the lobby. A director stepped out with a list. He read names. Mine came before Brandon's. My badge felt heavier all at once. Brandon stared at the carpet like it might say something kinder. Outside, the air was cold and clean. I zipped my coat, checked the time, and walked toward my car without looking back. The ground felt level. Finally, I played the recording at the dinner table after everything was already packed. Not as a threat, not as leverage, just the truth. Placed between the plates like something that belonged there. Dad listened without interrupting. Brandon stared at his hands. The room stayed still while their voices came back at them, flat and unmistakable. When it ended, Dad cleared his throat. I didn't think it would cost you that much. I nodded once. That's because you never calculated the cost when you weren't the one paying it. No one argued. No one apologized the right way either. That was fine. I wasn't there for repair. The next morning, I loaded my car before anyone woke up. The house looked the same from the driveway. Quiet, intact, like it always had. My apartment in Inglewood was small, one bedroom, thin walls, a heater that clicked when it came on. I hung my badge by the door the first night and left it there, even on days I didn't need it. The recording stayed on my phone for a while. Then, one night, I moved it into a folder and stopped checking to make sure it was still there. I didn't need proof anymore. I knew what had happened. I knew what I survived. I didn't cut my family off. I just stepped back. Enough space to breathe. Enough space to hear my own voice again. Noelle Hart doesn't live behind locked doors now. She leaves when she needs to. She stays when she chooses. That difference changed how I stand in a room, how I take up time, how I trust myself when something matters. If this story stays with you, you can follow Revenge Pulse for more like it. We're here quietly, paying attention.